Welcome back to the deep dive. We are incredibly glad you are here with us today.
Absolutely.
If you're a man who has been looking around at the shifting dynamics of modern institutions, your relationships, and just, the broader societal power structures, if you're watching the way the world operates right now and asking yourself, what exactly is happening behind the scenes and how did we get here? Well, this deep dive is explicitly tailored for you.
It really is. We're getting into some intense territory today.
We are. But before we start mapping out the architecture of today's topic, please remember to hit that like button and subscribe to the show so you never miss our deep dive.
Yes, definitely do that.
Today, we are unpacking a highly provocative, intensely debated 2025 ebook by Conrad Riker titled Radicalized Shrews, Feminism, The Dark Legion of Demons, in her chaotic, panicked, and raging heart. And I want to let you know right up front that this text is available right now.
Highly recommend looking it up.
Yeah, we highly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Play Books to buy a copy for yourself so you can read the unfiltered text. You should absolutely follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack, too.
It is a massive, meticulously detailed text. The scope of what Riker is attempting to do here is staggering. He brings together elements of evolutionary psychology, clinical psychiatry, ancient theology, and modern demographic data to construct a very specific, highly confrontational worldview.
Right.
He's essentially trying to trace the exact lineage of how historical institutions have been fundamentally rewired.
And our mission today is to completely unpack the history and the mechanics of how those institutions have evolved, or, in Riker's view, how they have been systematically captured according to his text.
That's the goal.
Now, it is absolutely crucial that I state this right out of the gate. We are establishing a strict neutrality disclaimer for this deep dive.
Very important.
Riker makes intense, politically charged, and highly controversial claims throughout this book. Our goal today is strictly to impartially report on the content provided in this text. We are not taking a side. We are not endorsing these viewpoints, nor are we condemning them.
We're just laying it out.
Exactly. We are simply trying to convey the ideas and the underlying logic contained in the original source material so that you can understand the arguments he's making and weigh them for yourself.
That is the perfect framing. Our job is to synthesize and explain the internal architecture of Riker's argument. He doesn't pull any punches either.
Not at all.
He refers to his own work as a full-scale ideological autopsy performed on the modern feminist movement. And he structures the book to show exactly how the symptoms of this ideology manifest from the micro level of a single household all the way up to the macro level of global governance.
Let's start right at the genesis of the book, because he doesn't open with macroeconomic data or academic theory. He opens with his own personal origin story.
Patient zero.
Right, the patient zero for his entire worldview. He paints a very vivid picture of growing up in a quiet, traditional Midwestern town. He describes an environment where church bells rang on Sundays, fathers taught their sons how to change the oil in their cars.
A very classic Americana upbringing.
Yeah, his father was a mechanic. The way Riker describes him, this was a man with grease under his nails, a spine of steel, someone who believed implicitly in hard work, silent sacrifice, and keeping his word.
What stands out in that opening chapter is the sharp contrast Riker draws between that stoic traditional masculinity and the ideological shift that suddenly occurred inside his own home.
Yeah, the shift.
He notes that his mother was a well-meaning woman, but she began bringing home library books centered around empowerment and breaking free from patriarchal structures. Riker traces the entire dismantling of his family directly to the insertion of this specific literature into their daily lives.
He calls it a slow rot creeping into the home. And he doesn't just mean his parents argued more. He maps out a fundamental shift in reality.
The dinner table dynamic completely flipped.
Exactly. The dinner table went from a place of normal family connection to a theater of constant, low-level confrontation. According to Riker, his mother began blaming his father for absolutely everything.
And we aren't just talking about minor household grievances.
No, not like who took out the trash or who paid the bills. She blamed him for her own internal unhappiness, her existential boredom, even her physical ailments like migraines.
Which sets up one of the foundational pillars of Riker's thesis. He argues that the literature gave his mother a framework to rewrite her reality so that she was never at fault and always the victim.
And the tragic endpoint of this anecdote is Riker, as a young boy, watching his father's spirit completely break.
He writes that his father stopped smiling, retreated inward, and eventually just stopped coming home.
The key takeaway Riker wants the reader to grasp is that his father wasn't dismantled by economic hardship or a personal moral failure or a physical threat. He was dismantled by the quiet, relentless erosion of female entitlement disguised as liberation.
That's a huge claim.
I want to pause on that because it is heavy. Let me make sure I'm following Riker's logic here. Is he just airing out childhood trauma? Or is he using this as a literal template for what he thinks happened to the entire culture?
It is entirely the latter. He explicitly uses this domestic breakdown as what he terms the American baseline.
The baseline. Okay.
He tells the reader that he spent the next 20 years of his life studying psychology, family law, and analyzing data specifically to understand what happened to his father, and by extension, what is happening to men across the West.
So his core thesis expands from that living room.
Right. He says modern feminism is not, and never was, a movement for equality. He diagnoses it as a spiritual plague and a collective psychic takeover.
He is incredibly specific about who this book is intended for, too. He directly addresses girl boss women, men who constantly apologize for their own existence, and anyone who values pronouns over fundamental principles, telling them to literally put the book down.
Close it, walk away.
Go scroll TikTok. He wrote this text explicitly for men who feel gaslit, taxed, blamed, and erased by the current system.
And to understand the scope of that system, Riker argues you have to look much further back than the cultural revolutions of the 1960s or the early suffragette movements.
He goes way back.
He insists that you cannot understand modern institutional capture without understanding the ancient spiritual rebellion that he believes is the true engine behind it.
Which brings us to his mythological framework. You're likely familiar with the mythology of Lilith.
The story of the woman who fled Eden.
Right. But Riker takes that familiar archetype and maps it directly onto modern political behavior. He doesn't just see her as an ancient myth. He frames her as the original template for what he calls the autonomous NPC feminist.
In Jewish mythology, Lilith is often described as Adam's first wife, created equal to him, but she refused to submit to any kind of hierarchy. She fled the garden and became a demonic figure associated with stealing infants.
And Riker connects that to today.
He looks at that and says, modern feminism doesn't just mirror Lilith actively, if unconsciously, worships her. He sees the refusal of natural order, the demand for absolute autonomy without responsibility, and the inherent hostility toward the family structure as a direct continuation of the Lilith archetype.
And he ties that ancient rebellion directly into what he calls the abortion industrial complex.
The scale of the data he pulls in here is jarring.
It is. He cites statistics claiming that over 1/8 of the global population has been aborted. But he doesn't frame this through the typical political lens of healthcare versus life. He frames it as a modern ritual sacrifice.
He draws a direct historical parallel to ancient Carthage, where infants were sacrificed to the fire god Moloch.
So the altars haven't disappeared.
Exactly. For Riker, the altars haven't disappeared. They've just been sterilized or rebranded with pink ribbons. The god being worshipped today isn't a bronze statue of Moloch. It is the god of hyperconsumption and absolute, untethered autonomy.
He argues that the unborn are offered up essentially as collateral damage so that women can avoid the physical and temporal consequences of their desires and maintain their position in the corporate marketplace.
So if a woman refuses that biological reality, what happens to that instinct?
This is a crucial part of his argument. He introduces this concept of the maternal archetype gone feral.
The baseline assumption he makes here is that the maternal instinct to nurture is deeply biologically hardwired. It cannot simply be erased by attending a work-life balance seminar or climbing the corporate ladder.
Exactly. Riker's psychological argument is that when a woman refuses to become a mother in the literal sense, that powerful nurturing instinct doesn't just vanish, it gets repressed, and then it inverts.
It becomes something deeply destructive.
The feral maternal archetype, as he describes it, forcibly splits the entire world into two distinct categories: helpless infants and evil predators.
Meaning, they still have the drive to mother something, but they apply it to the state and to society at large.
Precisely. In the modern feminist worldview Riker is critiquing, women and marginalized groups are permanently cast as the infants. They are viewed as inherently fragile, constantly traumatized, and in perpetual need of state protection, new speech laws, and therapeutic intervention.
While men, conversely, are cast as the predators.
Right. They are viewed as inherently dangerous, constantly suspect, and in need of relentless surveillance and control. Riker points out that this isn't genuine care. It is a pathological need for control, justified by a twisted, misapplied maternal drive.
He actually uses Vice President Kamala Harris to illustrate this specific dynamic.
He does.
He points out her demographic realities. She is divorced, has no biological children of her own, and he contrasts that with how she operates politically, famously referring to herself as a top cop.
Riker analyzes her use of weaponized maternal language.
He cites quotes where she says things like, "We're going to love you to death," while simultaneously pushing what he views as draconian punitive policies. He labels this specific phenomenon animus possession.
To really grasp this, we have to look at how Carl Jung viewed the psyche, which Riker relies on heavily.
Jung believed we all have a masculine and feminine side. The animus is the unconscious masculine drive inside a woman.
And Riker is arguing that modern society encourages women to kill off their innate nurturing feminine side.
Leaving this hollow, unintegrated masculine drive the animus running the show.
But because it's unintegrated, it doesn't build or protect like healthy masculinity, right? It just tyrannizes.
That is the exact distinction he makes. When a woman becomes possessed by her animus, she mimics male authority. The deep voice, the power suits, the aggressive posturing. But she completely lacks male accountability and the deeply ingrained male instinct to protect the innocent.
She becomes performative.
Yes, she uses that soft, nurturing language as a shield to justify incredibly harsh, punitive actions against men and the broader society. It's a very dark psychological interpretation of modern female leadership.
So, if we take that psychological framework, the feral maternal instinct and animus possession, how does Riker say that actually translates into the physical structures of our world?
This brings us to his analysis of institutional capture.
He doesn't just stay in the realm of mythology and Jungian theory, he brings in hard contemporary data. He highlights 2023 data from the U.S. Bureau of Labor Statistics showing that a staggering 87% of human resources managers are women.
For Riker, that 87% statistic is not an organically achieved example of workplace diversity. He views it as undeniable evidence of a hostile ideological takeover.
He argues that human resources departments have evolved from administrative support roles into the weaponized enforcement arm of feminist ideology within the corporate world.
Walk me through how he thinks that weaponization actually works on a day-to-day basis. If I'm a male employee, how does Riker say this 87% female HR apparatus affects me?
Riker argues that the entire corporate vocabulary has been rewritten to favor female communication styles and penalize male ones. If a man speaks plainly, leads with unapologetic confidence, or refuses to perform what Riker calls emotional servitude.
Like constantly validating a coworker's feelings during a project meeting.
Right. If he refuses that, he is incredibly vulnerable. That female-dominated HR apparatus can, and according to Riker, will label him toxic, intimidating, or not a culture fit and systematically eliminate him from the corporate structure.
He explicitly states the system isn't broken. It is functioning exactly as it was designed to function, to suppress male ambition and enforce emotional compliance.
And he points out that this capture isn't isolated to the corporate world. It is arguably even more deeply embedded in academia. Riker calls this the death of the trivium.
The trivium refers to the classical educational foundations, grammar, logic, and rhetoric. It is the framework for how to think critically and argue based on objective truth.
Riker argues that logic itself is currently being dismantled in universities, specifically because objective logic is a lethal threat to emotional narratives.
He points to the academic theory of standpoint epistemology, championed by feminist theorists like Sandra Harding. This isn't a fringe idea. It's taught in sociology departments across the country.
Standpoint epistemology argues that a person's social position, their marginalized identity, actually gives them a superior, more objective view of reality than someone in a dominant group.
In practical terms, Riker argues this translates to a system where a woman's emotional hunch or subjective feeling of unsafety is treated as academically and professionally more valid than a man's empirical proof.
He claims that in modern universities, the very concept of objective, verifiable truth is actively taught as a patriarchal construct designed to oppress.
Think about the implications of that for a second. To illustrate how this plays out, he points to a leaked email from the committee at the University of California.
Oh, this was wild.
The committee was allegedly discussing how to implement empathy audits during the tenure review process. And the explicit stated goal in the emails was to use these audits to manage difficult men.
Let that sink in. You have a system where tenure for a brilliant researcher or professor isn't based on their scientific breakthroughs, the rigor of their data, or their teaching excellence,
It is based on an empathy audit.
which is inherently subjective and designed specifically to enforce emotional submission to a female-coded standard.
It completely replaces academic rigor with ideological compliance. And Riker gives another chilling example of this mechanism in action with a male teacher in Michigan.
This teacher raised completely rational, academically sound concerns about the school's curriculum.
They were actively replacing the works of William Shakespeare with a self-published memoir written by a local gender-fluid activist.
The male teacher correctly identified this as an academically bankrupt move that would harm the student's education.
And how did the administration respond to his logical critique?
They didn't engage with his logic at all. According to Riker, he was subjected to an immediate mass cancellation campaign. He was formally investigated, ostracized by the staff, and eventually forced to issue a public apology just to keep his livelihood.
Riker points out that the female-dominated administration reacted exactly like an immune system attacking a virus.
They acted as a hive mind, repeating ideological slogans and focusing entirely on how his critique made people feel, rather than addressing whether his critique was factually correct.
He frames this entire dynamic as the war on merit, and it goes all the way up to international diplomacy.
He cites a 2022 report from the UK Civil Service. This report openly showed that entry standards for elite diplomatic roles were quietly but intentionally lowered,
Why?
specifically to ensure a higher percentage of female representation.
The explicit focus shifted away from rigorous cognitive testing and geopolitical knowledge toward evaluating candidates on emotional intelligence and collaborative spirit.
Riker argues that merit is under relentless attack because pure, unadulterated, objective merit inevitably exposes female mediocrity in high-pressure, hyper-competitive domains.
His logic is brutal but consistent. If you cannot win the game by the established rules of logic, competence, and performance, you must change the rules so that the game centers entirely around feelings, identity, and consensus.
And that reliance on emotion over logic, that shifting of the rules, brings us to the psychological core of Riker's entire thesis.
He diagnoses modern radicalized womanhood through the clinical lens of borderline personality disorder, or BPD.
And it's important to note, he isn't just throwing this term around as a casual internet insult. He is framing it as a literal, societal-level pathology.
He points to 2020 data from JAMA Psychiatry showing that women are 70% more likely than men to be clinically diagnosed with BPD.
He takes that clinical data and maps it onto political behavior. Riker argues that female-coded leftism absolutely thrives on and is powered by core BPD traits.
We are talking about an intense fear of abandonment, severe identity disturbance, chronic feelings of emptiness, and extreme black and white all-or-nothing thinking.
He claims that modern institutions haven't just accommodated these BPD traits, they have essentially institutionalized them as their standard operating procedure.
Wait, let me challenge this for a second. How does Riker reconcile this? On one hand, he's saying these feminist institutions are ruthlessly effective, highly calculated, and incredibly successful at capturing global power.
Right.
But on the other hand, he's diagnosing the drivers of this movement with borderline personality disorder, which is fundamentally characterized by chaos, self-sabotage, and instability. How can a system be both incredibly chaotic and systematically calculated?
That is the exact paradox Riker addresses with what he calls the GSR complex gossip shame rally.
He argues the system isn't calculated in a traditional strategic, masculine sense of planning a war. It is calculated in a deeply social, relational sense.
The chaos is the weapon. He cites a 2022 Stanford study which found that women engage in covert relational aggression 7 times more often than men do.
Relational aggression, meaning they don't punch you in the face.
Exactly. They don't typically use physical violence, which is easily identifiable and punishable. They use the silent treatment, elaborate whisper campaigns, and calculated reputation sabotage.
Riker explains the GSR mechanism like this. One woman whispers a suspicion or a feeling of being slighted by a man. Others immediately rally around her, validating her emotion as absolute truth without requiring a shred of empirical evidence.
Then the collective group moves to systematically shame and isolate the male target. The calculation is in the pack behavior.
It is driven by emotional contagion, and it is devastatingly effective because it operates completely outside the bounds of traditional logical debate.
To illustrate the identity disturbance aspect of this BPD dynamic, Riker gives some wild examples of what he terms identity parasitism.
He talks about a woman named Emily R. from Portland.
At age 25, Emily was a conservative Baptist school teacher who happened to start dating a vegan socialist.
Within 6 months, she quit her teaching job, started a Sacred Plant Vibes TikTok account, and completely rebranded herself as a neo-pagan anarchist.
And he gives an even more extreme example with Sarah Kay from Toronto, who rotated through 3 completely distinct lives and husbands in an 8-year span.
Husband number 1 was a liberal organic farmer, so Sarah became a militant locavore, judging anyone who ate processed food.
Husband number 2 was a conservative Muslim. Sarah immediately pivoted, began wearing a hijab, and posted long essays online about the profound beauty of female submission.
Husband number 3 was an anti-Islam, right-wing YouTuber. Within months, Sarah is posting viral memes framing Islam as a form of child abuse.
It gives you whiplash just thinking about it. Riker uses these examples to argue that many modern women, deeply infected by this cultural pathology, do not possess a continuous, unified sense of self.
They outsource their identity entirely. They outsource it to the hive mind of their friend group, to the social media algorithm, or to their current romantic partner.
He describes it as downloading belief systems the way you or I would download a smartphone app. You use it while it's beneficial, and you delete it when it's not.
And here's the terrifying part of Riker's analysis. Because objective truth isn't a fixed external reality for them. Because truth is literally just whatever feels real in that specific emotional snapshot. They can lie, completely contradict themselves, or destroy someone's life without feeling a single ounce of cognitive dissonance or guilt.
He backs up this weaponization of emotion with a fascinating 2021 Pew survey. The survey found that 63% of women openly admitted to using the phrase, "I'm not angry, I'm just disappointed," on a weekly basis in their relationships with men.
Riker calls this emotional jujitsu.
It is pure passive aggression wrapped in a cloak of moral superiority. Riker breaks down the psychology of that phrase. The woman is in reality furious.
But expressing raw anger would require her to own her emotions and engage in a direct logical conflict where she might be proven wrong.
So she refuses to take responsibility for the anger. Instead, she projects it outward as disappointment, instantly inducing guilt in the man, shifting the entire burden of the conflict onto his shoulders and making him feel like a fundamental failure.
And this chronic refusal to integrate and own their own anger leads directly back to what he described earlier as animus possession. Because they repress their masculine drive and refuse to engage in direct conflict, that energy ferments and eventually explodes in incredibly chaotic, destructive ways.
Riker describes watching a viral video of a young woman in Portland. She is standing in a public square, screaming at the top of her lungs, smashing a mannequin labeled toxic masculinity with a literal claw hammer.
She is swinging wildly, screaming, "Die, patriarchy!" while a massive crowd of women stand around her, cheering and crying in support.
For Riker, when you watch that video, you aren't watching political activism. You are watching the ritualistic catharsis of a deeply possessed, culturally sick psyche.
And we have to ask, where does all this pathology find its perfect breeding ground? Where does it metastasize?
The internet. Riker dedicates a massive portion of the book to analyzing how the digital realm amplifies this BPD-style behavior to a horrifying global scale.
He cites MIT research analyzing the flow of information on Twitter. The data shows that emotionally charged misinformation lies that trigger outrage or fear spread 70% faster than neutral fact-based content.
And here is the absolute kicker. Riker points out that 83% of that viral outrage is generated by female users, despite the fact that women only make up roughly 54% of the platform's user base.
Riker doesn't mince words. He calls social media a demonic amplifier. The algorithms are not neutral. They are explicitly designed by tech companies to reward emotional volatility, relational cruelty, and extreme displays of victimhood.
This technological ecosystem creates what Riker refers to as NPCs, non-player characters.
These are individuals who are completely mimetic. They are emotionally hijacked by the algorithm. They march in lockstep and aggressively chant slogans they don't even possess the intellectual capacity to understand.
He proves this by citing a brilliant 2024 University of Oregon study. Researchers surveyed women who had recently posted the phrase, "men are trash," on their social media profiles.
The study found that 68% of these women literally could not define the word patriarchy, nor could they name a single foundational feminist theorist.
Their rage is entirely rented. It is an ideology implanted by the algorithm because the algorithm knows that rage keeps them scrolling.
And it doesn't just keep them scrolling, it gets them paid. This has burst what Riker brilliantly terms the crying economy.
Think about how insane this is. Victimhood is no longer something to be overcome. It is highly coveted, high status, and heavily monetized.
Riker points out the analytics of YouTube algorithms. Videos that feature a creator shedding visible tears in the first 30 seconds earn 6 times more ad revenue than videos without tears.
The incentive structure is entirely rigged against emotional stability, authenticity, and logic. If a woman posts a video saying she had a great day, solved her problems, and feels stable, the algorithm buries it. She gets ignored.
But if she posts a tear-streaked selfie from her car, claiming she is triggered, doing the work, and healing from trauma, she is immediately flooded with social validation, hundreds of thousands of followers, and lucrative corporate sponsorships.
To show the real-world devastation of this incentive structure, Raker gives a terrifying example of an Oregon college student.
This young woman happened to see a private text message over her male roommate's shoulder. The text simply said, "Feminism is overrated."
It was a private thought shared with a friend. She took a screenshot of the text, posted it on her public social media with the caption, "This man hates women and is a danger to campus," and the post went nuclear.
It garnered over 400,000 likes in a matter of days. And look at the asymmetric fallout.
The university administration, operating under those empathy audits we discussed earlier, immediately expelled him to appease the online mob.
His family, terrified of being doxxed, cut ties with him. His future teaching career was completely ruined before it even began.
And what happened to the woman who stole his private communication and destroyed his life?
Absolutely nothing negative. She faced zero academic or legal consequences. In fact, she was universally praised by the media as brave and stunning.
Her Instagram following tripled, allowing her to monetize her account. She completely destroyed a man's life, not in the pursuit of justice or safety, but purely to mine him for social currency.
And it's fascinating how that monetization of victimhood online, what Riker calls the crying economy, acts as a training ground for the physical world.
Because if you can extract social currency from a TikTok video by claiming emotional injury, Riker argues you use that exact same playbook to extract literal financial currency in the legal system.
Exactly. The weaponization of emotion bleeds directly into family law. Riker brings up a comprehensive 2024 analysis of divorce filings.
The data revealed that in 61% of cases where women explicitly cited emotional abuse as the primary reason for initiating the divorce, the actual complaints listed in the affidavits were shockingly mundane.
We're talking about complaints like the husband not enthusiastically liking her Instagram post, or him taking more than 10 minutes to reply to a text message while he was at work.
Riker argues these are not instances of abuse. They are instances of narcissistic injury. The woman didn't get the exact emotional supply she demanded in that exact second.
But because the legal system knows that the phrase emotional abuse essentially guarantees a favorable ruling for alimony, child custody, and social support, the language is intentionally twisted to frame an ordinary man as an abusive monster.
Riker views this as a complete societal rejection of adult responsibility, and he points to the viral girl dinner trend on TikTok as the perfect, encapsulated metaphor for this rot.
For those who missed it, girl dinner was a massive trend where women proudly posted videos of themselves eating a handful of potato chips, a pickle, and some gummy worms on a paper plate, calling it self-care and an act of rebellion against cooking.
Most people view that as a harmless, quirky meme. Riker looks at it and sees the abyss.
He ties it directly back to the feral maternal archetype from the beginning of his book. He argues that girl dinner is the active, celebrated rejection of nurturing, of motherhood, of sustenance, and of the basic, fundamental responsibilities required to maintain human adulthood.
It is the celebration of reverting to a helpless, infantile state.
Which perfectly sets the stage for Riker's brutal analysis of the macroeconomic realities. He views the entire modern system as an elaborate economic parasite, and he argues it is entirely feeding off of male labor.
The statistics he brings up to support this are incredibly stark. In the United States, in the first year following a divorce, the average man's standard of living plummets by 73%.
Meanwhile, the average woman's standard of living actually rises by 23%.
Riker does not mince words when discussing these numbers. He bluntly refers to family courts as state-sponsored extortion.
He argues that the entire legal apparatus operates on a fundamental, unwritten assumption. Women are perpetual victims who inherently deserve to be subsidized regardless of their choices, and men are simply walking ATMs whose sole purpose is to have their generated assets redistributed to cover the costs of female autonomy.
He zooms out to point out a massive, undeniable macroeconomic paradox that defines the modern West. Look at the numbers. Women currently make up 57% of all college graduates.
They hold a staggering 70% of all student debt. And Riker makes a point to note that a vast majority of this debt is accumulated for degrees in fields with a negative return on investment, like gender studies or intersectional theory.
Furthermore, women drive 70% of all consumer spending in the economy.
Let that paradox sink in. You have a demographic that completely dominates the universities, dominates the accumulation of educational capital, and overwhelmingly controls the consumer market.
Yet, despite holding all of these levers of economic and cultural power, this exact same demographic continually claims to be a systematically oppressed, marginalized class.
And simultaneously, they demand that either men, or the state via taxation, pay for their choices, their debts, and their safety.
To illustrate how this looks on the ground, he shares an incredibly frustrating case study of a woman in Ontario. This woman has 2 children, fathered by 2 different men. She chooses to work only part-time as a barista at a local coffee shop.
But by strategically combining her meager part-time wages with an array of state child benefits, court-mandated child support from both fathers, and subsidized housing assistance, she pulls in a tax-free equivalent of over $60,000 a year.
Riker points out the grim reality of that math. She is literally out-earning a male factory worker who is doing grueling, physically destroying overtime shifts to keep the electrical grid running or build infrastructure.
Yet she doesn't feel an ounce of shame. She sees gaming this system not as a necessary evil, but as her absolute empowered right.
And the culture actually praises her for it. Riker directs the raiders' attention to TikTok trends using hashtags like #WelfareQueen, #SecuringTheBag, and #IndependentQueen.
These tags have hundreds of millions of views. It is an entire subculture of women eagerly sharing tips, legal loopholes, and strategies on how to extract the maximum amount of resources from the state and from their ex-husbands.
Specifically so they can maintain a comfortable lifestyle without ever having to commit to full-time work.
He backs up this anecdotal internet evidence with hard data from the UK Department for Work and Pensions from 2022. The data shows that single mothers currently claim 64% of all available housing benefits in the UK.
They are frequently placed in multi-bedroom, taxpayer-subsidized homes. Meanwhile, the data shows that unemployed, single men are largely left to sleep in temporary hostels on the streets or in their cars.
Riker frames this entire dynamic as a financial parasite that has taken up residence inside the modern woman's mind. It is a parasite that fundamentally confuses reckless spending with personal strength and views the consumption of resources as the ultimate form of control.
He argues the system is structurally designed to reward the most irresponsible, chaotic female behavior while relentlessly taxing, punishing, and discarding male accountability.
So after laying out this vast, depressing landscape, the mythology, the institutional capture of HR in academia, the psychological pathology of BPD, and the ruthless economic extortion, Riker pivots to the most crucial question of the book.
How are men actually responding to this?
What does the masculine counterinsurgency look like? Because according to Riker, men are finally waking up.
And the way they are waking up isn't through violent revolution, it's through silent attrition. Riker introduces a 2021 study from the University of Michigan, and the numbers here are absolutely mind-blowing.
The study found that 42% of men in their 30s have permanently deleted dating apps like Tinder, Bumble, and Hinge.
That is a staggering, civilization-altering demographic shift. Almost half of all men in their prime, building, earning, and family formation years are simply walking away from the table.
Riker points out that they aren't deleting the apps because they happily found love and got married.
Yeah.
They are deleting them to completely escape what he categorizes as financial and emotional warfare.
They have looked at the landscape, run the cost-benefit analysis, and realized that participating in the modern dating marketplace requires them to endure constant weaponized emotional labor, risk false accusations, and sacrifice their basic dignity for a deeply unfavorable return.
So they are doing the only logical thing left. They are opting out.
But they aren't just opting out and vanishing into the woods, they are organizing. Riker points to the massive rise of the Red Pill movement and online male-centric communities.
He specifically highlights a group called the Men's Forum, which boasts over 120,000 active, verified members.
Now, mainstream media and the institutions we discussed earlier universally portray these spaces as dangerous, radicalized hate groups. But Riker completely reframes them. He calls these communities modern survival manual.
He argues that if you actually spend time in these forums, these men aren't sitting around endlessly whining or plotting violence. They are sharing hard empirical data and actionable legal strategies.
They are teaching each other how to navigate a hostile HR department, how to avoid false Title IX accusations on campus, how to legally secure bulletproof prenuptial agreements with strict no-kids clauses.
And most importantly, how to spot the red flags of BPD-coded, animus-possessed behavior before they let a woman into their lives.
They are actively learning how to protect their hard-earned assets and their peace of mind. Riker sees this not as misogyny, which is how the system labels it, but as a hyper-rational, deeply logical response to a system that is transparently rigged against them.
These men have learned the hard way that high-conflict, ideologically captured women make for incredibly expensive, life-ruining disasters.
And Riker zooms out to look globally, proving that this isn't just an isolated American phenomenon, it is the inevitable result of this ideology wherever it takes root. He points to Japan and the rise of the herbivore men.
These are millions of young, healthy Japanese men who flat out refuse to date, refuse to marry, and largely refuse to engage in romantic relationships.
And it's not because they lack a biological sex drive or ambition. Riker explains that these men watched as Japanese women began demanding all the legal and social perks of Western feminism: autonomy, career focus, freedom from domestic expectations.
While simultaneously demanding that the men continue to fulfill all the grueling, traditional Eastern duties of being the sole, high-earning financial provider.
The men simply did the math. They realized the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. They retreated into video games, hobbies, and isolation.
And now, the Japanese government is in a state of sheer panic as birth rates collapse and the tax base shrinks, proving Riker's point. When men collectively stop chasing, the entire societal engine grinds to a halt.
To hammer this point home, Riker makes a brilliant side-by-side comparative analysis between two totally different societies to prove that ideology always trumps economics when it comes to family formation and civilizational survival. First, he looks at Iceland.
Iceland considers itself the ultimate feminist utopia. They have strict equal pay laws enforced by the government, heavily state-supported childcare, and mandatory gender quotas in corporate boardrooms.
By the logic of modern feminism, women in Iceland should be incredibly happy and having plenty of children because the structural barriers are gone.
Yet their fertility rate has collapsed to a dismal 1.7, well below the replacement level required to sustain a population. Riker argues this proves that when women are given absolute autonomy, they demand the benefits of family without accepting the responsibility or sacrifice of commitment.
And he powerfully contrasts the collapse of Iceland with the Amish model right here in the United States. Think about the Amish through Riker's lens. They have absolutely zero state welfare.
They do not have feminist support groups, HR departments, therapy culture, or work-life balance seminars. They live entirely outside the matrix of modern ideological capture.
Yet they average 7 children per family. They are remarkably stable, entirely self-sufficient, and their population is exploding and thriving without a single dime of state funding.
Riker points out the staggering hypocrisy of elite childless academics in Ivy League universities sneering at the Amish, calling them backward or oppressed.
The empirical reality, Riker notes, is that the Amish model guarantees robust civilizational survival, while the celebrated feminist model of Iceland guarantees demographic and economic collapse.
Which brings us to Riker's analysis of a figure who has become a massive flashpoint in this cultural war, Andrew Tate.
This is perhaps one of the most controversial but deeply argued points in the entire book. Riker argues that when the nation of Romania, aided by international authorities, arrested Tate in 2023, it was not actually about the stated criminal charges of violence or human trafficking.
Riker views the arrest through the lens of pure ideological warfare. He claims the global system targeted Tate specifically because of his core message to young men.
Tate was actively teaching millions of young men to build physical discipline, earn their own money outside the corporate matrix, and most critically, to completely stop seeking female approval.
Riker argues that this specific message is an existential, lethal threat to the feminist industrial complex.
Because, as Riker's argument lays out, female-coded leftism absolutely requires male submission in order to function. It physically needs men to constantly chase female validation, to apologize, and to produce the resources the system taxes and redistributes.
The midget, millions of young men listen to someone like Tate, decide to master their own lives, and begin laughing at gynocentric shaming tactics. The entire ideological structure loses its power source and starts to collapse.
Riker claims the media hit job and the legal persecution were highly coordinated, specifically because Tate was effectively freeing a generation of men from that psychological prison.
It is a profound synthesis of everything Riker has built up in this text. The greatest threat to this captured system isn't men getting angry. Anger means they still care. Anger means they're still engaged in the conflict.
The ultimate threat is men becoming completely indifferent.
The threat is men prioritizing their own brotherhood. It's men going on male-only retreats in Montana to discuss philosophy and lift weights. It's men focusing on solo travel, building their own wealth, mastering skill-based hobbies, and quietly but firmly refusing to participate in the corporate and romantic games that they know are explicitly rigged against them.
Which leaves us with a final, highly provocative question to ponder. This is something that builds on the entirety of Riker's analysis, but it asks you to look 10, 20 years down the road.
If Riker is right about this trajectory, if millions of competent, capable men are systematically withdrawing from the dating pool, withdrawing from marriage, abandoning corporate ambition, and halting their institutional participation just to preserve their sanity and their assets.
What happens to the physical, economic, and literal infrastructure of a civilization when its foundational builders quietly decide to put down their tools and stop maintaining it?
That is an incredibly heavy, sobering thought to leave on.
It really is. As a reminder to everyone listening, we have spent this deep dive thoroughly reviewing Conrad Riker's intense 2025 ebook, Radicalized Shrews, Feminism, The Dark Legion of Demons, in her chaotic, panicked, and raging heart.
Quite the journey.
Whether you found his arguments enraging or profoundly validating, we highly encourage you to check out Amazon Kindle and Google Playbooks to buy a copy for yourself. You need to read the unfiltered truth of his arguments directly from the source. And definitely go follow the author at Conrad Riker on Substack for more of his ongoing insights and data analysis.
Go read it and decide for yourselves.
Thank you so much for joining us on this deep dive into the mechanics of our modern world. Please remember to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and we will see you next time.